Imagine, you open a map and look for a route from New York to Paris. The app will show you a flight path across the Atlantic Ocean. But imagine, in the year 1908, there was a group of men who believed they could drive a car from New York to Paris. No airplanes, no ships crossing the ocean. They believed they could drive across the ice of the North Pole. Welcome to the greatest and also the most ridiculous auto race in human history. 100 ridiculous things that happened at the Great Auto Race of 1908.
Welcome to Weird History of Sleep.
Welcome to Weird History of Sleep. I am so glad you have returned here tonight. The world out there is racing too fast, isn't it? But here, in this room, everything slows down. Right now, find your most comfortable position. Let your back sink deep into the mattress. Pull the blanket up to your shoulders. Feel the warmth spreading throughout your body. Take a deep breath and exhale very slowly. Imagine you are standing in the middle of Times Square, but not the noisy square of today. But a gray winter day more than 100 years ago. Tonight, we will embark on an impossible journey. A journey where bravery and foolishness are separated by only a hair's breadth. We will count together, counting 100 strange facts about the 1908 New York to Paris race. Do not try to memorize the route. Do not worry about the destination. Your only task is to relax, listen to the slow idle of the engine in your mind, and fall asleep. Close your eyes, and let us begin. Number 1. The idea of the race sounded like an April Fool's joke, but it was completely serious. The challenge was to drive a car from Times Square, New York, head west, cross America, go up to Alaska, cross the frozen Bering Strait to Russia, and finally drive to Paris. A route of 35,000 kilometers at a time when most of the world did not yet have paved roads. Number 2. The start time was set for February 12, 1908, in the middle of winter. Why winter? Because the organizers believed this was the only way cars could drive across the frozen rivers in Alaska and Siberia. They chose deadly cold as an ally, a decision they would regret every single second later on. Number 3. On departure day, about 250,000 New Yorkers poured into the streets to cheer. The crowd was so large that the police completely lost control. The drivers could not even start their engines for fear of running over the feet of spectators, pushing and shoving just to touch these strange machines. Number 4. Only 6 cars participated in this crazy race. Representing America was the Thomas Flyer. Germany had the Protos, Italy had the Züst, and France, the automotive superpower of the time, sent 3, de Dion-Bouton, Motobloc, and Césaire-Naudin. 6 tiny cars against the entire Earth. Number 5. Let's talk about heating technology. You might think that going into the Arctic, the car must have a heater. But no. In 1908, the concept of heated seats or climate control was science fiction. All cars had open cockpits. The racers were completely exposed to wind, snow, and hail. Their only protection was thick fur coats and blind faith. Number 6. The smallest car in the group, the French Césaire-Naudin, encountered trouble immediately. It only made it about 70 miles, over 100 kilometers out of New York, before breaking its rear axle. Their journey around the world ended on the very first day, before they even left New York State. A sad record for an early exit. Number 7. As soon as they left the city, the racers realized a harsh truth. America in 1908 did not have roads in the true sense. There were only mud trails meant for horse-drawn carriages. And because it was February, the snow was melting, turning these paths into endless swamps of sludge. Number 8. The average speed of these speed machines while crossing America was about 10 miles per hour. Sometimes, a fast walker could overtake them. There were days when they only moved a few kilometers after more than 10 hours of struggling with the mud. Number 9. The French monoblock car got into trouble for being overloaded. This team had brought along all sorts of bulky luggage, including wine and luxury food, because they were French and they did not want to eat poorly. The result was that the car sank deep into the mud faster than anyone else. Number 10. There was no GPS, and road maps at that time were extremely sketchy. The only way for the racers not to get lost in the vastness of America was to follow telegraph lines or railroad tracks. If you saw a 1908 car bouncing along on train tracks, those were our racers. Number 11. Running on train tracks was torture. The car wheels did not fit the rails, so they had to drive bouncing up and down on the wooden ties. Imagine the feeling of sitting in a metal box, shaking violently and continuously for 10 hours straight. Their teeth clattered together with every bounce of the wheels. Number 12. The Italian team with the Züst car encountered a silly incident of romantic nature. Antonio Scarfoglio, the team's racer and poet, was stopped by American police not for speeding, but for flirting too blatantly with local women in a small town. Italian charm is sometimes an obstacle. Number 13. When the snow fell too thick, the most modern cars in the world had to rely on the technology of the previous century: horsepower. Images of aggressive cars being dragged by a team of horses or mules through deep snowdrifts became a laughingstock in the newspapers of the time. Number 14. The German Protos team, led by Lieutenant Hans Koppen, were the most disciplined but also the unluckiest. Their car was big, heavy, and had low clearance. It acted like a reluctant snowplow. They spent more time shoveling snow than holding the steering wheel. Number 15. There were no hotels along the road. When night fell in the desolate fields of the American Midwest, the racers had to sleep right in the cars or pitch makeshift tents by the roadside. Temperatures dropped below zero, and they had to sleep sitting up, huddled in damp fur blankets smelling of gasoline. Number 16. The American Thomas Flyer had a strange advantage. George Schuster, the lead driver, was a genius mechanic but also very stubborn. He didn't believe in maps, he believed in intuition. And strangely, his intuition often helped the American team find shortcuts through farms that no one else knew about. Number 17. In Indiana, the mud was so deep that people compared it to giant rat glue. There were times when the mud reached up to the wheel axles. The racers had to disassemble parts of the car, carry those parts across the mud puddle, and then reassemble them on the other side. They became porters for their own vehicle. Number 18. The competition between teams was not as fierce as in the movies. In reality, when they met on the road, they often stopped to help each other fix their cars. The shared misery in the American winter created a strange friendship. The American team once pulled the Italian team out of a ditch, and afterward, they shared a bottle of whiskey to warm up. Number 19. The French motoblock team finally gave up in Iowa. The reason was not because the car was completely broken, but because they had suffered enough. They sold the car, took a train to New York, and took a ship back to Paris, swearing never to drive a car off the paved roads of Paris ever again. Number 20. A funny detail about clothing. Because there were no windshields, the racers had to wear protective glasses as big as diving goggles. After days on the road, their faces were blackened by coal smoke and dirt, except for 2 white circles around their eyes where the goggles sat. They looked exactly like exhausted pandas driving cars. Number 21. As the convoy entered Wyoming and Utah, they faced the majestic Rocky Mountains. No mountain passes were paved. The American Thomas Flyer had to climb slopes so steep that the fuel tank couldn't feed gravity-fed fuel to the engine. The mechanic had to sit on the hood, holding a can of gasoline, pouring it directly into the carburetor while the car was climbing. A manual and dangerously smelly way to refuel. Number 22. In the Nevada desert, the concept of a road completely disappeared. There was only sand and sagebrush. The racing teams had to chop down tons of sagebrush, spreading it on the sand to create a temporary road mat for the wheels to grip. They would go a few meters, stop to chop bushes, spread the road, and go again. A slow and painful dance in the middle of the desert. Number 23. Hallucinations began to appear. Due to severe lack of sleep and the harsh desert sun during the day, the racers started seeing things that weren't real. George Schuster of the American team swore he saw a glittering city of gold on the horizon, but when they arrived, it was just sunlight reflecting off bare rocks. Number 24. The Italian Züst team had a terrifying experience in the Sierra Nevada mountains. On a dark night, their car slipped and hung right on the edge of a precipice. The whole team had to sit perfectly still, daring not to breathe heavily, waiting until the rescue team arrived to pull them back onto the trail. The line between life and death was just a few centimeters of loose gravel. Number 25. There was a loyal audience following the convoy throughout the Wild West leg, packs of wolves. The strange engine noise attracted them. At night, when the racers camped to sleep, they could see glowing pairs of eyes surrounding the fire in the darkness. Modern cars besieged by primitive wilderness. Number 26. On March 24, 1908, the American Thomas Flyer rolled into San Francisco. They were the first team to complete the North American transcontinental leg. The car looked like a pile of moving scrap metal, covered in mud from 12 states, but the crowd cheered as if they were victorious gods returning from Mount Olympus. Number 27. And this is where the real absurdity began. The Alaska Plan. The organizers still insisted that the racers must drive from America to Russia across the frozen Bering Strait. So, the Thomas Flyer was craned onto a ship to be transported to Alaska. They were heading into a frozen trap they knew nothing about. Number 28. The American team arrived in Valdez, Alaska on April 8th. They hoped to see a flat ice road stretching north, but what they saw was soft snow. Snow 4 to 5 meters deep. Locals looked at the car and laughed uncontrollably. They said, "Here we use dogs to pull sleds. No one uses this exploding machine." Number 29. The truth about the ice road in Alaska was a giant hoax. The organizers in Paris had looked at a map and seen a straight line. They thought it was a passable road. In reality, it was just a trail for dog sleds. The 2-ton car sank immediately upon touching the snow, buried up to its roof. Number 30. The American team tried to move in desperation. They hired horses again to pull the car over the snow, but even the horses sank. The world's greatest auto race in Alaska turned into a competition of how to dig a car out of snow 50 times a day. Number 31. After a few days of struggling and moving a ridiculous distance, the American team telegraphed the organizers, "Cannot proceed. Alaska is not a racetrack." It was the moment when human delusion had to bow before the power of Arctic nature. Number 32. The organizers were forced to change the route immediately. The teams were ordered to return to Seattle by ship, then take a steamer to Japan, and finally to Russia. The Alaska leg, the pride of the original route, was completely canceled after weeks of wasted effort. Number 33. While the American team was miserable in Alaska, the German Protos team made a clever, or cheating, depending on how you look at it, decision. Seeing their car was heavily damaged, they secretly shipped the car by train from Idaho to Seattle, skipping thousands of kilometers of difficult terrain. They accepted a time penalty to keep the car from disintegrating before leaving America. Number 34. The French team, de Dion, also quit at this point. The owner of de Dion in France felt the race had become too ridiculous and costly. He ordered the team to withdraw. So only 3 cars continued the journey around the world: America, Thomas Flyer; Germany, Protos; and Italy, Züst. Number 35. Speaking of the American team again, after returning from Alaska, they fell behind. To compensate for the foolish effort in Alaska directed by the organizers, the American team was awarded a time allowance of 15 days by the organizers. This meant that when arriving in Paris, if they were slower than another team by less than 15 days, they would still win. A messy rule born from a silly mistake. Number 36. The journey across the Pacific began. The cars were strapped down in the cargo hold of the steamship. After months of shaking on dirt roads, the cars now had to endure the rocking of ocean waves. Salt water and humid air began to corrode metal parts that were already rickety. Number 37. On the ship, the racers had their first rare days of rest in 2 months. But they couldn't sleep well. Their bodies were used to the bouncing of car seats. The softness of the mattress on the ship made them feel like something was missing. George Schuster recounted that he often woke up with a start because he didn't hear the engine noise in his ear. Number 38. The convoy docked in Japan first. The Japanese people in 1908 had never seen metal monsters this big and filthy. When the American team drove through small villages in Japan, people fled in fear or knelt to pray, thinking they were chariots of demons. Number 39. Roads in Japan were extremely narrow. They were designed for rickshaws, not cars. At sharp turns on mountain passes, the racing teams had to get out, physically lift the rear of the car, and rotate it by hand to make the turn. Human strength once again had to serve the machines. Number 40. But the real challenge was still ahead. After Japan was Siberia, Russia, the most vast, desolate, and mysterious land in the world. The racers thought America was hard. Alaska was a mistake, but they didn't know that Siberia was the true hell waiting for them, with bottomless mud and bandits. Number 41. The convoy docked in Vladivostok, Russia. This was the gateway into wild Siberia. Here, the racers received bad news. Spring had arrived. It sounds contradictory, as spring is usually beautiful. But in Siberia, spring means melting ice, and melting ice means the entire ground turns into a giant bottomless swamp. Number 42. Russians have a specific word for this season. Rasputitsa. The season when roads disappear. It is not normal mud. It is a thick, freezing sludge capable of sucking down anything that falls into it. Our 2-ton cars were about to swim in that sea of mud for thousands of kilometers. Number 43. As soon as they left Vladivostok, the American Thomas Flyer encountered transmission trouble again. They lost reverse gear and were left with only 2 forward gears. Imagine driving over the world's most treacherous hilly terrain without being able to reverse, and the gearbox making a crunching sound like coconuts banging together every time gears were shifted. Number 44. Since the roads had turned into rivers of mud, the racing teams once again had to beg for help from the Trans-Siberian Railway. But this time, they weren't officially allowed to drive on the tracks. They had to do it secretly or recklessly, balancing the car on slippery railroad ties with abysses or swamps beneath. Number 45. The distance between the 2 car wheels was slightly wider than the distance between the 2 rails of the Russian train tracks. This meant one set of wheels would run on the rail, while the other would run precariously on the wooden ties lining the track. The car tilted constantly, making the racers seasick right on dry land. Number 46. The biggest fear at the Manchuria-Siberia border was not car breakdown, but tigers. Yes, Siberian tigers. These giant predators still roamed the dense forests. The racers always had to keep rifles nearby, and whenever the car stalled in the forest at night, they sat perfectly still, listening to every rustle of leaves outside. Number 47. Fuel was a logistical nightmare. There were no gas stations in the middle of Siberia. A company named Nobel Brothers, related to the prestigious Nobel Prize, had to prearrange fuel depots along the railway line. But often the racers arrived only to find the gas drums empty or stolen. Number 48. The German Protos team, led by Lieutenant Koeppen, showed steely discipline but also tragicomedy. When their car broke an axle in the middle of the forest, instead of panicking, they pitched tents, cooked food, and calmly fixed the car as if they were in a garage in Berlin. Koeppen even took time to write a detailed diary about the wildflowers he saw while waiting for the car to be fixed. Number 49. In Siberia, mosquitoes were the rulers. As summer approached, billions of mosquitoes and horseflies rose from the swamps. They were so dense they obscured the sun. The racers had to wrap their faces tightly in scarves, leaving only 2 eyes, but still got bitten until their bodies swelled. Driving in a buzzing cloud of mosquitoes was a form of extreme mental torture. Number 50. The Italian Züst team continued to have trouble with their romance. Passing through remote Russian villages, they were often warmly welcomed by locals with vodka. Refusing to drink was impolite. Therefore, there were stretches of road they drove in a slightly tipsy state, driving while singing loud Italian opera songs amidst the Russian birch forests. Number 51. A rare incident happened to the Thomas Flyer. It sank into a mud pit so deep that only the headlight was visible. The entire American team spent 4 days and nights digging it out. They didn't sleep, ate sparingly, soaking in waist-deep freezing mud to save the SAR. It was 96 hours of hell on Earth. Number 52. To cross vast rivers with no bridges, the teams had to build their own rafts. They chopped trees, tied rafts, and drove the precious car onto them. Imagine the instability of a primitive wooden raft carrying a 2-ton block of iron in the middle of a fast-flowing current. Just one small mistake, and the race would end at the bottom of the freezing river. Number 53. The loneliness in Siberia was absolute. There were days they drove for 20 hours without seeing a single soul, not a single house. Just forests, gray skies, and an endless muddy road. It felt like they were the last survivors on Earth. Number 54. The American team met a group of convicts on their way to exile in Siberia. The prisoners looked at the car with amazement, as if seeing a spaceship. George Schuster stopped and shared cigarettes with them, a strange intersection between modern technology and tragic human fate. Number 55. Hunger was constant. Food reserves were gone or spoiled. The racers had to buy whatever the locals had: raw eggs, black bread as hard as rock, and goat's milk. Once, the American team had to eat soup made from grass and roots to survive the day. Number 56. The German Protos team, although arriving in Siberia first, suffered severe car damage and had to wait for parts sent from Moscow by train. While waiting, the American team caught up and passed them. The race suddenly became dramatic again, in the most desolate place in the world. Number 57. Language was a huge barrier. No one on the American team knew Russian. They communicated via body language. Sometimes they wanted to ask for directions to Moscow, but the locals pointed them into a rice field, simply because the locals had never seen a map and didn't understand what they were asking. Number 58. Beef tallow and candles saved the car's lives. When engine lubricant ran out or solidified due to the cold, the racers had to melt candles and animal fat to pour into the engine. The car ran sluggishly and smelled of burnt barbecue, but at least it ran. Number 59. The minds of the racers began to crack. George Schuster of the American team started talking to the car as if it were a human. He scolded it, coaxed it, begged it not to die. In the terrifying silence of Siberia, the car became the only trustworthy companion. Number 60. As they approached the Ural Mountains, the natural boundary between Asia and Europe, the road became steep and full of boulders. Tires blew out constantly. Some days they had to change tires up to 15 times. The racers' hands were calloused, cracked, and bleeding from prying tires manually in the biting cold. Number 61. When the convoy crossed the Ural Mountains, they saw a simple stone marker. One side read, Asia, the other, Europe. For men who had spent months in the wilderness, this sign was not just geography. It was a ticket back to human life. George Schuster of the American team stopped and stroked that milestone as if reuniting with a lost relative. Number 62. But civilization in Russia at that time was still a relative concept. The roads from Moscow to St. Petersburg were not paved but lined with round logs laid side by side, corduroy roads. Driving on them created a steady, bone-rattling vibration, making the racers' bones feel like they were shaking out of their sockets with every roll of the wheel. Number 63. The German Protos team, after receiving replacement parts, made a spectacular break. The big, powerful German car was extremely suited for the hard dirt roads of Europe. They began to leave the American team far behind. The race was no longer a battle for survival. It became a real speed race. Number 64. Arriving in St. Petersburg, the racers were welcomed like kings. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, a car enthusiast, expressed special interest. Imagine the contrast: filthy men with bushy beards, smelling of gasoline, standing in a magnificent gold-plated palace, surrounded by groomed aristocrats offering congratulations. Number 65. In Russia, the racers encountered the white nights phenomenon. The sun hardly set. This disrupted their already exhausted biological clocks. They didn't know when to sleep or when to wake. The dim light lasting 24 hours put them in a state of sleepwalking, driving unconsciously. Number 66. A funny incident occurred when the American team tried to ask for directions in a Russian countryside area. The people here had never seen a car, so when the car belched black smoke, they thought it was on fire. Instead of giving directions, they ran to get buckets of water and threw them straight at the racers to put out the fire. Enthusiasm at the completely wrong time. Number 67. Entering German territory, road quality changed abruptly like magic. Flat, wide roads appeared. The Protos team took to it like a fish to water. They sped up to 60 to 70 km/h, a dizzying speed at that time. The sensation of gliding smoothly after half a year of bouncing made the racers feel like they were flying. Number 68. However, good roads meant a new danger: traffic police. In Siberia, no one cared how fast you went. But in Germany, the rules were very strict. The American team was stopped by German police near Berlin, not for a ticket, but to check customs papers. George Schuster had to ransack a pile of filthy luggage to find the crumpled pass. Number 69. As the Protos team entered Berlin, the capital of Germany, nationalist fervor ran high. Thousands of Germans poured into the streets cheering, throwing flowers and hats onto the car. The car was so surrounded by the crowd it couldn't move. Lieutenant Koeppen, the hero of Germany, had to stand on the car seat waving while he only wanted to go home and sleep for a very long time. Number 70. An ironic political fact. Since the French team had quit long ago, as the convoy passed through Europe, the French suddenly turned to cheer for the American team. They didn't want to see their neighbor rival, Germany, win. The American Thomas Flyer suddenly became the hope of the French, even though they were unrelated. Number 71. The temptation of soft beds. Passing through European towns, the racers saw lit-up hotels with warm blankets and soft mattresses right by the road. It was terrible mental torture. In Siberia, they had no choice but to sleep in tents. But here, comfort was just a brake pedal away, yet they were not allowed to stop. Number 72. The American team had big trouble with the signage system. In Europe, the road system was intricate like a spider web, but the signs were written in German or French, all languages the mechanic George Schuster was blind to. They got lost many times in major cities, driving in circles around beautiful squares in extreme frustration. Number 73. Livestock in Europe was a silly obstacle. Chickens, geese, and pigs roamed freely on the streets. They weren't used to the speed of cars. Many unlucky chickens became unwilling victims, and the racers sometimes had to stop to pay money to angry farmers chasing the car with brooms. Number 74. At the French border, the German Protos team was 4 days ahead of the American team. Physically, the Germans would definitely arrive in Paris first. But remember the gift of 15 days the organizers gave the American team for the Alaska incident. This created a bizarre situation. The Germans raced to finish first, while the Americans raced against the clock to finish within a safe margin. Number 75. Entering France, the American Thomas Flyer began to fall apart. The chassis was cracked. The engine rattled. George Schuster feared the car would crumble right before the gates of Paris. He had to drive extremely gently, as if cradling a fragile egg, while still maintaining high speed. Number 76. July 26, 1908. The German Protos team saw the Eiffel Tower in the distance. They were the first to see the finish line. But when they drove into Paris at 6:15 p.m., the atmosphere was quite gloomy. The French were not very excited to welcome a winning German car. No trumpets, no brilliant fireworks like in Berlin. Number 77. The silliest headlight incident in racing history. As the Protos drove onto the Parisian boulevard, a French policeman stopped them. The reason? Their car had a broken headlight, and Paris law forbade driving at night without lights. Imagine, you just drove around the world, crossed Siberia, and got stopped in the final meters because of a broken light bulb. A kind passerby had to jump on the car, holding a burning newspaper to act as a light for them to cross the finish line. Number 78. The German team finished first physically. They popped champagne at the hotel. But they knew this victory wasn't certain. They had to hold their breath waiting for the American team. If the American team arrived in Paris within the next 30 days, 15 days for the train, 15 days Alaska bonus, the German team would lose. A victory hanging by a thread. Number 79. Meanwhile, the American team was still struggling in Germany. George Schuster was so exhausted he hallucinated that the steering wheel was a python wrapping around his arm. He had to ask his teammate to slap his face repeatedly to stay awake. Cannot sleep. Paris is ahead. Number 80. And on July 30th, 1908, 4 days after the Germans arrived, the gray Thomas Flyer, covered in the road dust of 3 continents, rolled into Paris. It looked like a pile of walking scrap. Paris police had to clear the way for this ghost carriage to proceed to the Le Matin newspaper headquarters. The French crowd cheered louder than when the Germans arrived. Number 81. After the American car arrived in Paris, the judges started doing the math. A simple addition and subtraction calculation determined the fate of the entire 35,000-kilometer journey. The German team finished 4 days earlier, but they were penalized 15 days for using the train in America. The American team arrived later, but was deducted 15 days for wasting time in Alaska on organizers' orders. Number 82. Final result. The American team, with the battered Thomas Flyer, was declared the winner with a lead of 26 days. George Schuster, the stubborn mechanic, officially became the first person to drive a car to win a race around the world. Number 83. What about the Italian team and the Züst car? They were still somewhere on the road. It wasn't until September 1908, nearly 2 months after the race ended, that the Italian car trundled into Paris. No one welcomed them, no trumpets. They simply arrived, turned off the engine, and went to sleep. But they finished, and that was a victory of silent perseverance. Number 84. What was the prize for the winner? You'd think a mountain of gold? No. The prize was a giant sculpted trophy weighing 700 kilos. But ironically, the New York Times, the organizer, did not award the cash prize as originally promised. George Schuster and his team received fame, but their wallets were empty. Number 85. After the race, George Schuster returned to the Thomas Motor Factory in Buffalo, New York. He didn't become a movie star or a famous speaker. He went back to being a mechanic, continuing to turn screws and fix engines in silence, as if that great journey was just a long dream. Number 86. The Germans felt pranked. Lieutenant Kupen and the Protos team always maintained that they were the technically true winners because they were the first to touch the Paris finish line. This dispute lasted for decades, reflecting the underlying tension between nations before World War I broke out. Number 87. The fate of the losing cars was miserable. Most cars participating in the race, including the French cars that quit early, were forgotten, sold for scrap, or stripped for parts. They were warriors abandoned after the war ended. Number 88. Even the champion Thomas Flyer had an equally tragic fate. After a short time on display, the Thomas Motor Company went bankrupt in 1912. The legendary car was sold through many hands, left rolling around in dilapidated warehouses, rusting and rotting, becoming a shelter for chickens and rats. Number 89. It took more than 50 years later, in 1964, for legendary car collector William Harrah to find the carcass of the Thomas Flyer. By then, it was just an unrecognizable pile of scrap. Harrah bought it back and began a meticulous restoration process to return its former glory. Number 90. To verify if that pile of scrap was the real champion car, they invited George Schuster, by then a 91-year-old man, to come see. Old man Schuster tremblingly touched the chassis and found the cracked weld marks that he himself had made in the dark in Siberia years ago. He wept and nodded. "Hello, old friend. It really is you." Number 91. The 1908 race proved one important thing. Cars were not just toys for the rich to drive in the park. They were a real, durable, and reliable means of transport. Global car sales skyrocketed after this event, opening the era of four-wheeled vehicles. Number 92. However, the race also killed the very company that created the champion. The cost of participating in the race was too huge, coupled with the subsequent economic recession, causing the Thomas Motor Company to collapse. Victory on the track could not save failure in the marketplace. Number 93. The world changed too fast after 1908. Just a few years later, World War I broke out. The roads the racers traveled in Europe became bloody battlefields. The open borders they crossed were shut tight by barbed wire fences. The innocence and romance of the 1908 race could never be repeated forever. Number 94. No one dared to organize a similar race for 100 years after that. The idea of driving through a Siberian winter was considered too crazy and dangerous, even with modern technology. The 1908 race still stands there as a solitary monument to recklessness. Number 95. In 2008, on the 100th anniversary, a group of enthusiasts organized a drive along the old route. But everything was different. Now there were paved roads, gas stations, GPS, and hotels. The magic of difficulty, of getting lost in a blizzard, had disappeared. Number 96. If you look at a map today, the Bering Strait still has no bridge. The dream of driving from America to Russia remains impossible. The white void between Alaska and Siberia still lies there, cold and challenging, as if mocking the failed efforts of humans years ago. Number 97. There is a small but thought-provoking detail. George Schuster was the only person in the racing group to go the full 35,000 kilometers without quitting or swapping drivers. A human's endurance is sometimes more durable than iron and steel. Number 98. The race left a lesson in humility. Humans can build complex machines, but before nature, before the mud of Siberia or the ice of Alaska, we are still incredibly small. Victory does not belong to the fastest, but to the one who knows how to endure best. Number 99. The Thomas Flyer is currently resting at the National Automobile Museum in Reno, Nevada. It stands there, clean and shiny under the lights. It no longer has to run. Its engine has been rested forever. The roars, the thunderous explosions of yesteryear are now just silence. Number 100. And the final thing. All those brave and crazy men are now sleeping peacefully. The muddy roads of the past are now covered in flat asphalt or swallowed by forests. The great race ended long ago. There is nothing left to rush for. No destination left to conquer. Right now, you have reached your own finish line. That is peaceful sleep. Turn off the engine. Relax the steering wheel, and let the car of your mind drift freely into the gentle night. We have finished counting. 100 truths about an impossible journey have passed. From noisy New York to magnificent Paris, from Alaskan ice to Siberian mud. You see, no matter how long and difficult the road, eventually the wheels stop turning. Every journey has an end point, and the end point of today is here, right on this warm bed. Now, let all the images of cars, white snow, and distant roads fade away. Fade away like exhaust smoke dissolving into the morning air. Your body is sinking, heavy and relaxed. Your breath slows down, steady. There is nothing left to worry about. Tomorrow's world will take care of itself. For now, darkness is your best friend. Go to sleep, sleep well, and dream gentle dreams. Good night.